Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the comeback album from Scotty McCreery called Seasons Change. So here's the ugly truth about not being an A-lister in mainstream country. Really mainstream any genre, but Nashville country especially, you've got no room for error. Doesn't matter if you have that one bad song that strikes in the middle of a trend that would otherwise be excused. If that flops as your lead-off single, then your career is pretty much toast. Now A-listers, well, depending on their clout, they've got a little more wiggle room, especially if they manage to correct their course and deliver another hit. But even if you have a grassroots following, if you're not a major star in an already oversaturated market, one big flop single will likely consign you to the dustbin of history. And in the aftermath of bro country, there have been a lot of those artists. And for the longest time, that's what I think everybody thought happened to Scotty McCreery. Coming off of American Idol, his major label debut record moved over 1 million copies. And while his follow-up See You Tonight in 2013 was hedging his bets in the tide of bro country, it still moved a lot of units, and on one of the deep cuts produced one of the best country songs of the decade. Yeah, in case you're wondering why I'm bothering to cover this, Feel Good Summer Song, that is the reason. A tremendously emotive and borderline subversive country song that basically ripped the guts out of bro country 3 years early. Why nobody bothered to release this as a single, I have no clue. Well, if you take a look at Mercury Nashville's criminal failure to market any of their good artists worth a damn, I'm going to be inclined to blame them, but I'm also inclined to blame them for Southern Belle. That flop lead-off single that Scotty McCreery released in 2015 that effectively went nowhere and for all intents and purposes effectively killed his career, which led him to leave Mercury Nashville and sign to Triple Tigers, a new country label built as a partnership between acclaimed indie distributors 30 Tigers and Sony. And in comparison to his last album, this looked to be a much more neo-traditional affair, bolstered by the release of the pretty damn great song 5 More Minutes and a much more streamlined production team. Scotty McCreery had writing credits on every single song. He looked to be finally more in his comfort zone, and with 5 More Minutes suddenly becoming a pretty decent sized hit on country radio, I had a fair amount of hope and optimism going into this. So is Seasons Change the comeback story that we've all been waiting for? Well, yes and no. And to be honest, if it wasn't for that big comeback story that I wanted to mention, I probably would have put this on the trailing edge. Not because it's bad, far from it. I'd probably say this is Scotty McCreery's most consistently solid record to date, and I can see it having some real staying power if marketed correctly with the right singles. But at the same time, the highs, they aren't quite as pronounced, and this leaves this as arguably less interesting. Even though it's doing a lot right, it's definitely a good record and one that I think will have some mainstream staying power for Scotty McCreery, but not really one with a huge standout songs that I'll wind up remembering years down the road. It's definitely solid, definitely likable, but I wouldn't quite say it reaches greatness. And you know what, actually, there's a more apt comparison that felt apparent after about 4 or 5 listens through this album. Fellow mainstream B-lister Jake Owen. And I don't mean that comparison negatively. I like both these guys. I think they're both underrated by the larger Nashville establishment. They both have remarkably charismatic delivery that has saved questionable material time and time again. And they're also both known for notching deep cuts that are leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of their competition or even their own lead-off singles. But it's hard not to feel like they both kind of hedge their bets when it comes to a lot of the writing on their albums as a whole. They can write and perform genuinely passionate, occasionally very challenging material, but they're also just as comfortable, if not more so, in lighter affairs that trend towards bro country, or broader American archetypes that are pretty much elevated on presentation alone, certainly not the writing. And make no mistake, you can stick the landing with some of this material. Bro country in and of itself can be good if marketed properly. Boys from Back Home is quite literally reminiscing about hometown football games, and combined with Scotty McCreery how he references sports on songs like 5 More Minutes, it's a good point of reference for him, and it helps that he can leverage his naturalistic sincerity on songs like This Is It and Still, or even the kind of doofy Wrong Again. It's certainly a better fit than the more pronounced meat-headed tendencies on Moving On Out, probably the worst song here. But really, the running theme on the songs that worked for me here is the detail in the lyrics, and fleshing out more of the stories to elevate them beyond the archetypes. Sure, it can trend towards list songs like In Between, but on the flip side you get the more melancholic Home in My Mind, which is a pretty conventional tour song that's elevated by the reality of his situation, how he can't just go back home, and how his imagination is just gonna have to fill in that blank. Of course, The other important thing to mention here is the production and the composition, and the one area where I feel Scotty McCreery has a decided advantage over somebody like Jake Owen, both because he pulls a hard right back towards more neo-traditional pickups in the pedal steel, the real drums, and easing back on some of the obviously synthetic elements. This is a pretty organic record. And again, for me, the challenge here is not just praising for what it isn't. I sure as hell prefer these tones to whatever trap snares and gaudy synths that Nashville's shoving into your latest interchangeable bro country act. But finding the songs that are indeed kind of distinctive, that's a little bit more of a challenge, and thankfully there are a few of them here. I've already talked about 5 More Minutes on Billboard Breakdown, but Scotty McCreery is one of those few mainstream acts that can use his choppy rollick in his guitar grooves without sounding like a genre concession, mostly through a better sense of dynamics and smart layering on songs like Boys From Back Home, or how well that bass guitar is balanced against the supple layering on This Is It. And still, even if that song, along with Whenever You Are, have these fizzy fragments that feel a tad bit too slick to fix well with the rest of the tonal choices. And then you get a cut like Home in My Mind. That might as well be a mid-2000s Tim McGraw song, and it's a great mid-tempo balance saturated with pedal steel. It sounds so good. Or how well the horns are mic'd on Barefootin. That might not be the smartest song or a complete step towards a countrypolitan sound, but it's still pretty likable. I really liked how the trumpet came through there. If I do have a concern with this album, it comes mostly in the composition. Aside from melody lines that don't quite vary as much as they should, one thing you will notice is how many of these hooks they'll end on minor notes or minor chords, and I'm not sure that's the best choice, especially when the content doesn't really require that additional melancholic note. It makes the record feel a shade more downbeat than it really needs to, and when you consider how mid-tempo and reserved it otherwise feels overall, it could have afforded a little bit more brightness or upbeat cheerful moments. Or on the flip side, actually take some chances with the subject matter and take the step to get a little bit darker, pay off those darker minor tones. But as a whole, you know what, I'm not going to say this was a safe comeback for Scotty McCreery, so much as any pivot away from pop country flies in the face of the Nashville songwriting machine these days, but it wasn't really one that surprised me all that much. And really, the more listens I gave to it, the more I'm convinced there's very little that's outright wrong with this album. Scotty McCreery is still a great performer, the tonal balance is as good as you will get in mainstream country, especially in the production, and the songwriting, while a tad bit conventional, never slips towards being embarrassing, and I respect him for that. Fans, they will certainly be satisfied with this, and if the single choices are smart, I can see Scotty McCreery regaining a lot of groundswell in the industry, but it does feel a tad bit transitional as a whole, and I find myself wishing Scotty McCreery at least included some deep cuts like Feel Good Summer Song that took more of a chance, either in the production or the songwriting. But for me though, yeah, it's still good. It's a very light 7 out of 10 for me. Definitely recommended, especially for mainstream country fans looking for an easy summer album, and one that's certainly a cut of quality above a lot of his competition. I can't promise it'll stick with you a great deal, but it's pretty solid and you'll probably dig it. Check it out. Pretty good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Don't really have a lot to say about this, but hey, it's worth a listen. I'm happy it came back well. And if you guys want to buy the record, links in the description below. And I got the poll up there for all you Scotty McCreery fans to tell me how wrong I am and how this is the comeback you've all been waiting for. Because hey, it is good. I'm not going to begrudge you that. And so I've heard a lot of comebacks go disastrously wrong. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. I'm probably going to be restructuring my Patreon a little bit in upcoming weeks, so pay attention for when I put out a video discussing more of that. And if you want to see what's currently on my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link to that below. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you then.